After Dr. Hamilton made his transition, he came back to report similar experiences on the other side. He also reported on his work in the physical. Now and again a violin, contacted by the medium, left her hands and was carried up into the air above our heads. Elizabeth, in the meantime, with her hands held, was sitting in the chair beside me. While in the air, the violin was repeatedly heard to thrum. These pluckings of the strings occurred both spontaneously and on request, and thus giving evidence that the materialized form possessed something in the shape of fingers able to perform this task, and the ability to interpret verbal requests and respond to them. Again, the responses might originate with Elizabeth, but that still did not explain how the violin strings could be plucked with no one touching them. Sometimes Dr. Hamilton, acting as spokesman, asked questions of the intelligences operating the raps, which they endeavored to answer. The following are some examples of the kind of question asked. Are the sitters in proper position now? Answer, yes. 3 raps. Are there other forms of mediumistic phenomena that we may hope to get? Yes. Can we get the direct voice? No. Can we get materialization so that all may see it? No. Can we get bigger and better molds yet? Doubtful. 2 raps. Can we get them like they obtained them in France? No. 1 rap. Is that because that medium is particularly adapted to that work? Yes. 3 raps. Can we hope to get photographs? Yes. Do you wish us to use flashlight? No. Shall we use daylight? No. Do you wish the camera to be focused and left open during a seance? Yes. Very emphatic. Is this the WTS control wrapping? Yes. Can we make any instrument along the radio line that will set up communication? No. Is the human brain then the only mechanism through which communication can be set up? Yes. Will you rap out the number on your side who are helping us? Raps given 7 times in succession. Is there any mechanical means that can be used? No. 1 rap. After the rap ceased, a tambourine hanging suspended in the cabinet was heard to jingle several times in the most unmistakable manner. January 12, 1925. The notes report that there was an event approaching of major importance to the Hamilton sittings. The 3 sisters of Mr. Broad, William Oliver Hamilton's law partner, were giving an evening party for some of their friends, and by way of entertainment had invited a Mrs. Mary Marshall, who gave readings by cards merely as an amusement, and for which she received a very small fee, usually a couple of dollars. When the elder Miss Broad came to have her fortune told, Mrs. Marshall suddenly said, "There is a short, fair man who comes to this house. His name is Oliver." And Mrs. Broad replied, "Yes, that is correct. He is my brother's law partner, William Oliver Hamilton, a very fine gentleman." William Hamilton was an older brother of Dr. Glenn Hamilton. Mrs. Marshall went on, "Well, his days are numbered. He will die very suddenly, either in his office or in his home. He will die so suddenly that he may have no relatives or friends with him. I see it all." Next day, around noon, William Oliver Hamilton died of a heart attack in his home, a boarding house, in his room, and nearly alone. Someone heard him groaning, went to him and phoned Dr. Hamilton, who was with him about 3 minutes before he passed on. The forecast had been fulfilled almost 100%. All this, of course, made a deep impression on the Broads, who later phoned Dr. Hamilton and informed him about the prognostication, and followed this up with a full signed statement by Miss Lena Broad, the lady who had been the recipient of the prevision. Their attention thus directed, for the first time, to Mrs. Marshall, the Hamiltons took steps to meet her. They learned that she was aware that she possessed unusual faculties which she tried to suppress for fear of people's ridicule and criticism. She was not a spiritualist, although she had attended a few meetings of this sort in the old country, and in Winnipeg now and again, but she had refrained from allowing her gifts to develop because some sort of inner fear kept her from doing so. However, they asked her to join their Elizabeth group as a sitter in hopes that they might see her precognitive faculty at work, record her utterances verbatim, and watch for the fulfillment if such should come to pass. They had no idea at this time of the staggering impact that Mrs. Marshall was to have on their work. On January 25, 1925, Elizabeth saw Arthur Hamilton clairvoyantly. He had died in 1919 at age 3. She said he was larger than his twin Jimmy. This seems to be the first time that Arthur appeared, and he continued to contact his family through the next few years. By October 8, 1925, W.T. Stead gave instructions for trying to get photographs by influencing a photoplate in darkness by supernormal means. These experiments, which had worked for Stead during his lifetime, did not work after his death, possibly because Elizabeth was not the right kind of a medium. Stead gave up the attempt after about 6 months. There were also occasions when events occurred that prompted Dr. Hamilton to consider the possibility that normal sleep was the gateway to trance. He thought the apparitions seen were hallucinations, subjective experiences, but it suggested to him that dreams, all through the ages, might at times be based on external stimuli. He concluded that people may well have been correct in assuming that their deceased friends lived on in consciousness and could communicate with them in this way. Stead had already begun to predict the coming of materializations, the discovery of a second medium, and the photographing of these materializations by the camera in light. At the séance of May 5, 1927, Mrs. Mary Marshall was present as a guest. Strong perfume filled the room. She went into trance and spoke in Parsi, a Hindu dialect, to W.B. Cooper, who had grown up in India. She had no knowledge of this language. At Harvard, in the early 1920s, Dr. Hamilton had met and become friends with Dr. Leroy G. Crandon. Mina Stinson and her mother had moved to Boston, where Mina found a position as a secretary in a large church. She was most attractive, witty, and charming, and she met and married Dr. Crandon, then an outstanding surgeon on the staff of the Harvard Medical School. In late December of 1926, Dr. and Mina Crandon visited Winnipeg, giving 3 séances there. Mina was by now known as the Boston medium Marjorie. Walter became Mina's control or guide when her mediumship developed in the early 1920s. Walter Stewart Stinson was born in Canada about 1885. Like many young men of his time, he traveled from the eastern part of Canada to the western prairies, and for a time worked as a farmhand thresher at harvest time on a farm near Minnedosa in Manitoba. Then he got a job as a helper or stoker on a steam locomotive. When he was about 27, he was injured in a collision, scalded with live steam, and lived only a few hours. His death date is August 8, 1912. Walter was 5 years older than his sister Mina, but there was a close bond of affection linking them, which was to manifest in this unusual way some 11 years after his death. Around 1927, Walter began to appear clairvoyantly to Elizabeth Poole and to Mary Marshall. He began to hint that they would soon be able to photograph what he called pictures, by which he meant ectoplasmic masses shaped so as to resemble the faces of discarnates that could be identified. The transference of their main interest to the new phenomena seemed in no way to inhibit or prevent the appearances of their older friends from before, Stead, Stevenson, Livingston, and others. Spurgeon, who had also repeatedly manifested through the Elizabeth mediumship, still spoke and wrote through her on occasion, and Myers, who now appeared for the first time since 1921, wrote in conjunction with Stead that on no account must they eliminate Mrs. Poole from their sittings. Her great powers were still needed for the new phenomena of pictures. White light was excluded as effectively as possible from the seance room, as it was found by experiment in the case of the Poole mediumship that its presence hindered the collecting and amassing of the psychic energy necessary to produce results. Mrs. Poole, who was quite plump but short, around 4 foot 8 inches, was strapped to the chair and her legs tied to the two front legs, and she wore luminous arm and ankle bands and buttons on her sweater. Dr. Hamilton found that the state of Elizabeth Poole's health, physical and emotional, had a bearing on the trance depth and the quality of the trance products. The deep trance was found to be an attunement process. It was noted that too much expectancy created a block. However, pleasant music provided a diversion. Mental quietude on the part of all the sitters was important. This mental quietude was a state of relaxed openness of mind, even while the seance room at times was noisy with talk between the participants on both sides of the veil and the mediums. Flammarion became the fourth regular communicator to utilize the Elizabeth Poole trance. Elizabeth complained that she could not understand him. He appeared to be speaking twisted, and that he was badly pockmarked, so much so that she called him Spotty. Some years later they found that his face had been disfigured by smallpox, although at the time of his manifestation this fact was unknown to any of them. On October 23, 1927, Elizabeth had a vision. She described the wreck of a grain train east of Winnipeg 40 minutes before it actually happened. All main points were later verified. Many witnesses heard her report. On October 30, 1927, Stead came by and stated, "I was with my little friend when she was in the train wreck. It was before it happened on your side. It was well done." Mary Marshall had become a regular member of Dr. Hamilton's group. On February 12, 1928, Mary Marshall, after returning to normal state, told the sitters that just before she became entranced, she had seen a young man come into the room. He had laughing blue eyes and a girlish complexion. He was playing on a tin whistle. It was her first clairvoyant experience of the young man in the Hamilton seance room. She described him as handsome. She said he was funny and he made her laugh. This new control refused to give his name, so that during this time, and for some weeks after his appearance, he was referred to as the fair young man. He appeared at both regular and impromptu sittings, and spontaneously at times to Mary. During this period, he appeared 18 times, dividing his attention almost equally between Elizabeth Poole and Mary Marshall. In these appearances, he used the various psychic faculties of both mediums: clairvoyance, clairaudience, trance visions, trance script, and trance speech. On March 4, 1928, following the sitting, Mr. Cooper informed Dr. and Lillian Hamilton that just at the close of the sitting he had heard a voice whisper near his right ear, "Goodbye, you old rascal. It's a secret. It's Walter. A hell of a looking bunch you are." In this way Walter introduced himself to the group.